Hey, welcome to church. I like it. All right, I'm going to just keep talking here. Hey, couple things up front. Here. Hey, good morning. My name is Josh Carstensen, lead pastor here. Hey, if you are a veteran, would you stand up right now? Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, from the bottom of our heart, thank you. It's been a weird week, all right? Thinking of the election, how it affects our families, military people, right? I mean, it affects your lives more than a lot of us, especially active duty. But you think about this last week, and I was kind of chuckling with the family that God's placed me in. In my extended family, we have had the largest of all reactions to this election, literally ranging from some family members are moving out of the country. Like, that's not a joke, that's real. Some are contemplating moving out of state. Some are just like, I am so excited, we're throwing a massive party, life is amazing. And some have no idea that we had an election. Like, I'm not joking. And all of them need Jesus. Like, no matter in my family who's where, like, my heart for my family and for our church and for our nation is that people would meet Jesus. And so I'm prayerful this whole week. God, I know no matter what happens, I'm going to get an earful from like, this is the worst country in the world to this is the best country in the world. And God, you're still good, and I'm going to be okay with that. And so I just recognize that we're all in different places, and we're all going to be experiencing different things this week. And so let's honor that and be on our knees for that. And thank you, veterans. Thank you for serving. Thank you for giving us freedom seems like too cheap of a word, giving us the lives that we're able to live. So thank you. We're going to get into the Sermon on the Mount. We're in this series that we are kind of go for the next 9 months into. We've been kind of walking verse by verse, line by line through this intro to the Sermon on the Mount, which is Jesus' most famous sermon. It's a sermon that the biblical writers put first. It's the very first words out of Jesus' mouth that we have in the New Testament in terms of how it's laid out for us. And so it's important. There's a lot here, and it's weighty. And every week we get another line that's like, wow, how am I supposed to comprehend this? And oftentimes we get a line that we're like, is that even true? Right? Be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. Like, how am I supposed to do that? Did Jesus even mean for that to be real? Today we get to another one of those lines. But in order to understand the weight of that line, we're going to rewind a few thousand years. We're going to go back to the end of the first book, beginning of the second book of the Bible, to a time where God called this man Abraham, this one man. He says, hey, through you, I am going to raise up a nation, and through this nation, I'm going to show myself to the world. Now, then we get a few generations where this great nation ultimately grows, and this family, it grows and grows, and then we see in the beginning of the book of Exodus, the second book in the Bible, we see this progression from this great family and how they end up in 4 centuries of slavery. And it's a painful progression, and it's a progression that we're used to today. And it starts the same way that all slavery starts. It starts with pride, right? You've got a people group, the Egyptians, who are seeing this other people group, the Hebrews, and they're saying, we don't like you because you're different from us, and we really like us, right? And this is how these things start. We like our worldviews. We like our habits. We like our traditions. We like, our hobbies. And we look at other people who are different than us, who think different than us, heaven forbid, vote different than us. And we say, I really like us. I don't like you. And so pride starts this progression. From pride comes prejudice. I not only love myself and I want to ostracize myself from you, but now I'm going to start like caricaturing you, and I'm going to like start slandering you, and I don't like you. And this is what the Egyptians were doing. I don't like what I see over here. And so we're going to talk about those people over there, right, as if we're different. And then that kind of progresses, and it moves towards persecution. Well, not only do we not like them, not only do I love myself, but we need to stop them because they're keeping us from progress. They're regressing, we're progressing, so we need to physically stop them. How do we stop them? Right? We persecute them so that they do not keep us from going where we want to go. And then from there, we get the slippery slope that leads to genocide. Right? Historically, this has always been the case. It starts with pride, and it leads to genocide. Right? And so in this nation, it started with pride, with Egypt. We don't want them to take over our nation. We don't want them to take over our worship. We don't want them to take over our customs. And so we are going to enslave them, and then we really want to flex on them, and occasionally we're going to say, let's kill all their baby boys. And when we don't know people individually, when we don't love people individually, this is just what happens. Right? And so our challenge for us as we're thinking about how history happens is, yeah, it's okay to be different. Let's see people where they are, and let's not be a people who slide down the slide that ultimately leads to genocide. After 4 centuries of slavery, 400 years, like you have this people group. They're not even a nation. They are enslaved, subjugated people. There's no hope for escape. There's no hope. Like that's the whole point. It's 400 years. You're not getting out. You're not dreaming of a day when someday you will be free. Like that's just not possible. That's not in your framework if you are a Hebrew at this point. And God, in the middle of that, calls this one guy in the middle of the desert. His name's Moses. He's an 80-year-old man. And God says, hey, I'm going to use you, and you're going to free this nation. Moses wasn't looking to be used. He wasn't on like this great spiritual quest. He wasn't like, God, I want to find you, and I want to be enlightened, and I'm going to go to church, and I'm just going to beg you, would you use me? He's at the point of his life where he's like, I'm giving up. Like when I was young 40 years ago, I thought I had future. I thought God was going to use me, and then he flees for 40 years. He's 80 years old. Like maybe some of us are there. Like we had hopes of what life may look like someday, right? Maybe it's going to be like this, and my family's going to be like this, and my career is going to be like this, and God's going to use me like this, and then we go through long seasons maybe where it feels like God's not using us for much of anything. And then God grabs this 80-year-old in the middle of nowhere through a burning bush, and he says, hey, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to use you to free this nation. And Moses is a stammering, can't talk, stuttering old man. He's like, I don't know how this is going to happen. And God says, just watch, which is fascinating because God could have done it like this, right? God didn't need to use Moses. He could have just said, I'm going to free my people by whatever, bringing dysentery to all the Egyptians so they can't walk. Like whatever he could have done anything. But he goes, nope, I'm going to use you, Moses, and through you, I'm going to display my power, ultimately this flex over these Egyptian gods by walking through these 10 plagues, and Moses, through obedience, does it. And we see 3 million people walk out of Egypt, and they walk through the desert. It's a fascinating story. It's this story where God does not initially take them to the freedom that he promised, right? When we have this idea of where we think God wants us to go, like maybe you're coming to church and you're like, okay, I'm following Jesus. He's got a plan for my life. And sometimes the plan is, yeah, I'm taking you to the desert where it's miserable and you have nothing. Like you don't have the comforts of relationship. You don't have the comforts of money. You don't have the comforts of any of the things that you think you want. And God says, hey, I'm taking you here because I want to strip away anything that you can rely on because I want you to rely on me because that's all you need. And sometimes we don't know that God's all we need until God's all we have. Right? And so we get to this moment with this nation where they are in the desert, they're wandering a bit, and God leads them to the base of this mountain. We call it Sinai. And at the base of this mountain for about a year, God keeps showing to his people, here's what life with me is going to be like. Here's what I'm preparing you for. And I'm going to give you enough just for today. He gives them food, literally manna from heaven. Right? Just for today. You can't store it up for tomorrow. I don't want you relying on anything else. I need you to rely on me and me alone for this day. And God's explained to them over this year, here's what this new life's going to look like. Here's what worship's going to look like. Here's what culture's going to look like. Here's what law is going to look like. And then he makes them a promise. He makes them this promise that says, hey, when we're going to this new place, I'm going to go with you. And I'm going to go with you in a very unique, very profound way that the world has never seen. I am going to have my manifest glory dwell with you. And this is a big deal. It's a big deal because the whole point is the world would see God being with a people. And God says, but I can only do this in a certain way, in a certain place, and I need you to build something for me. It's called a tabernacle. Later, this becomes the temple where God's presence is built. And God calls up Moses to the mountain to give him instructions on how to build this place so God's presence can be with them. And as Moses is up on the mountain, he's on the mountain for about a month or so, as the people are preparing to leave to this place, as God's preparing the instructions to build this place, we get this tragic moment that some of us are familiar with, but we're going to read it. I'm going to read it. I believe it's up here. It's Exodus 32. This is a moment where Moses is on the mountain. God is giving him instruction on what it's like to build this place where God's going to dwell with them. It says this, starting in verse 1. When the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered themselves together to Aaron, this is Moses' brother, and said to him, "Up, make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." So it's like, well, we haven't seen him for a little while. Let's make us some new gods. So Aaron said to them, "Take off the rings of gold that are in the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me." So all the people took off the rings of gold that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron, and he received the gold from their hands and fashioned it with a graving tool and made a golden calf. And they said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." All right, this is one of those head-scratching moments where when you read it, what is now about 4,000 years later, you just go, how in the world could they be so stupid? Right? Like, if I was there, if I watched God part the Red Sea, right, like, my response would have been way different. And I don't think it really would be, because what's happening here is they're not saying that these events didn't happen. What they're doing is they're reverting back to an old religion that they came from. They're reverting back from a culture around them that said, oh, we can make up gods and we can fashion them out of gold and we'll worship these things. And clearly this devastated both Moses and Yahweh, the Hebrew God. And God says, I'm going to kill them all. And Moses says, please don't do that. Like, that really would not go well for your reputation. I'm trying to build your reputation. Like, we're trying to do this whole nation thing so that the world will know. And God relents. Some people say he changes his mind. That's not true. It feels like that in the text, but it's not. And then we get this really interesting dialogue. God says, okay, I'm not going to kill everyone, and I'm going to give you everything that I promised. I'm going to give you the land, I'm going to give you the houses, I'm going to give you the cars, I'm going to give you the vacation, I'm going to give you the career, I'm going to give you everything that I promised you, and I'm not going with you. Which is a fascinating question. If God gave you everything that you thought you wanted, and he said, and I'm not going with you, would you take it? If God said, hey, you can have the career, sure. You can have the family, you can have the white picket fence, you can have the new Tesla, whatever the thing is that you want. You can have all these things, but I'm not going with you. Would you make that trade? And Moses says, he says this. It's actually in verse 33. It's verse 15 of chapter 33. He says, if you're not going with us, if your presence will not go with me, do not bring us up from here. For how shall it be known that I have found favor in your sight, I and your people? Is it not in your going with us so that we are distinct, I and your people, from every other people on the face of the earth? God says, yeah, you can have it all. I'm not going with you. And Moses says, no. Like, if you're not going, I'm not going. And then God says, okay, I'll go with you. Then Moses says something fascinating, and this is where we're getting to today. Moses, at this point, after God has said, okay, I'll go with you, Moses says this. He says, prove it to me. He says, I want to know that I can trust you. I want to know that I can believe the words you're saying to me. And he says it with this one little phrase. In verse 18, he says, show me your glory. In other words, he's saying, I want to see you. God, you are making some huge promises. You promise that you're going to go with me to this land. You're making these huge promises that you're going to dwell with us in this profound way. How do I know that I can trust you? I want to see you. I want to see you. Forget all the things that I've thought about you before, because you think about Moses and you think about his relationship that he had with God. He had a relationship with God that was profound, right? Starting way before when God saves his life as a baby, but as an 80-year-old, God revealing himself through a burning bush that's not actually burning, that's talking, right? Starting with 10 plagues, starting with 3 million people walking through a parted Red Sea, starting with watching God recede the waters and the army disappear, watching God provide food every single day. And Moses is looking back on all this going, but what if that's not actually you? And what if I can't trust you? God, I want to see you. I want to know for sure that the faith that I think that I have in you is actually you. And you think about us, and I think that's a question that all of us wrestle with, right? When you think about our lives, that is the ultimate goal. I want to see God. Right? We have a bunch of people in this room right now, and God has worked in us in a lot of different ways. Right? Some of us, we have moments where, man, maybe we went to camp as a junior hire and we just felt the presence of God in a very unique way. Right? Maybe some of us, we were at a church service or some miracle happened. We saw all these stories last year of God working in profound ways, but there comes a time in a lot of our lives where we look back on a lot of these moments and we wonder, was that really you, God? Or did I just make that up? How do I know that I'm right? How do I know? There's a billion other people worshiping different gods on this planet. What if they're right? Right? What if the Muslims are right? Right? What if I'm trying hard to genuinely follow you and I'm getting it wrong? And sometimes when we have these thoughts, the question comes down to, God, can I just see you? Can I validate all the beliefs that I have by seeing you? How sweet would that be? How strengthened would our faith be if instead of me up here right now, God himself was right here? That ought to be a little boost in the old religious morale. I'd like to think you'd be a little more excited, which is fair. I know I would be. God responds, and he says this in chapter 33, verse 20. He says to Moses, "You cannot see my face, for man shall not see me and live." Well, this seems a little unfair. If the best proof that God exists is being able to see him, why does God then say, nope, you can never see me and live? Are we all just left wondering, hoping that feeling that I had actually was God? I'd really like to see him, and why not? Why wouldn't God do this? If he loves the world so much, why not just show everyone? Right? Why not today, 2024? Wouldn't that be fabulous? Right? For the 33-year-old or the 70-year-old who's deconstructing their faith, who's going through this journey of I don't know if all those things that I did for all that time was actually God. I'd love to see you, and God saying, nope, you can't see me. Why is that fair and why is that good? I'd really like to know. For those of you who are a little bit dialed in, you're thinking, oh, there's a punchline coming, right? We can see him, and it's Jesus. And that's partially true. And before I get into trouble, listen to this. John 14:9. Whoever has seen me has seen the Father. That feels really clear, right? This is Jesus. Whoever has seen Jesus has seen the Father. And 1 John 4:12 says this. No one has ever seen God. And that's right after John says that God sent his Son into the world. So what does that mean? Right? And why does 1 Timothy 6:15-16 say, the only sovereign, the King of kings and Lord of lords, who alone is immortality, who dwells in inapproachable light, whom no one has ever seen or can see? And that's after Jesus came. So there is a sense in which we long to see God, and we should all long to see him. Like that would be incredible. And there's a sense in which I'm reading that I can't see him. And it seems pretty clear. Moses tells him, you cannot see me and live. Well, why is this? There's a couple of reasons. Number one, God's Spirit. Number two, he makes it clear, you can't see me and live. Like, because of my sinful nature to be in the presence of God, like, my body couldn't handle it. Like, I am sinful. He's too holy. He's too just. He's too right. Like, I literally could not handle it. And I'm trying to think of an analogy and how to describe what this would feel like or why that this feels true. And the best analogy I can think of, have you ever been in a place that's just filled with people in a very, like, energy-filled moment, right? I think about going to a football game, like a significant football game. A couple years ago, the Civil War was happening, and it was at the end of the game. The stadium was packed. We were about to win, and just like that feeling when 40, 50,000 people are screaming at something, like that's a big feeling, right? You feel that. I've been in stadiums with 90,000 people screaming in these moments, and I think like, to be in the presence of God, you take that moment, which feels powerful, and you multiply that by like 100 billion. Like, yeah, I couldn't take that. Like, my body could not take that. You get this idea that we can't be in the presence of God. God made it clear to Moses, you cannot see me. Now then, 2,000 years later, Jesus comes on the scene, and he's going to say something today that feels very contradictory to all this. Because Jesus says, actually, you can see him. So we're going to open up to Matthew chapter 5, verse 8, our one verse for today. I'm going to ask that you would stand. We're going to read it together. It's going to be up here. We're going to read this. All together, let's go. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You can grab a seat. Well, there you have it. Simple formula. We actually get to see him if we have a pure heart. So what does this mean? What does it mean to have a pure heart? And then what does it mean to see him? Because is Moses wrong? Was God wrong when he said that to Moses? What does it actually mean to see him? And how do we have this pure heart? Let's talk about this pure heart for a minute. To have a pure heart means correlating actions with desires, that there's no hypocrisy between the both. See, our life, we put a lot of effort into having good, right actions. Right, to look good on the outside, to have certain behavior, right, to be polite to people who voted differently than us. But what Jesus is getting after is, no, your heart needs to align your actions, meaning while you're polite to this person, do you genuinely love this person and care for this person? Right, so he's getting after a heart that matches actions. And again, we're obsessed with actions. Right? You think about the world that we live in, like we're always trying to display our actions both to ourselves and to those around us. Like, oh, here's my social media, here's my life, I'm doing all these things. And God says, these things are good and I want you to do pure things, but I want you to have a heart that is pure and I want your motives to be pure. And this is really, really hard. It's easy to have the right action. The heart behind it's a lot harder. But I think about right now, my family got a few kittens recently, super cute. They're about 5 months old, and we also have a hunting dog. And trying to interact them together in a way that my dog doesn't kill my cats has been a little bit of a challenge. But so far, so good. It looks like this. It looks like, on occasion, I will put a very strong shock collar on my dog, and I will be right with him when I let him out to be near the cats. And he will go next to the cat, and so far, actions are good. He hasn't eaten anything. But he will stand in the point position, his body violently shaking, while doing the right thing and not eating the cat. His soul, on the other hand, is just like, I want to eat you, I want to eat you, I want to eat you, I want to eat you. Like, what's this wicked thing around my neck that's keeping me from eating you? But my actions on the outside, if you were just to take a picture, you would think, oh, everything looks great. They're buddies. But the heart, not so much. Right? See, we can curate our life to look like that snapshot. Oh, I'm going to church. I'm in a community group. I'm nice to my coworkers. I'm a decent boss. I'm a decent kid. And Jesus says, great. Now, I want your heart to match that. Turns out that's actually really, really hard. Turns out it's actually impossible. John Calvin, who is a theologian in the 16th century, he wrote this about our struggle with having pure intentions. He said, the human heart has so many crannies where vanity hides, so many holes where falsehood lurks, is so decked out with deceiving hypocrisy that often it dupes itself. He says, sometimes even doing the right thing, he says, sometimes we do it not even knowing that our motives are wrong. Or there's another guy, Jeremiah, he says this about our heart and our desires. He says, the heart is desperately sick and deceitful above all things. Who can understand it? So we got a problem here when Jesus says, oh yeah, you can see him. All you have to do is have a pure heart. Well, how do I have a pure heart? I can fake the pure actions, but what's my heart doing, right? What's my screen doing when I'm home alone and no one else is around? Right? What's my mind doing when no one sees what's happening in there? Right? What am I reading? Right? Where's my heart? Not just my actions. Jeremiah says my heart is wicked. Well, how am I supposed to see him if I can't get this clean heart? And what is Jesus talking about? This whole idea of having a pure heart, this is Jesus saying, blessed is a person who recognizes that they need their heart cleaned. This is an ongoing process. The word pure here is the Greek word katharos. We get our word catharsis from it. It's this idea, it's a twofold idea. It's this idea that, first of all, we need our hearts to be purified, and we can't do that, so they need to be cleaned by someone else. Right? We get this verse, 1 John 1:9. If we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us. That's that word clean, pure, to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. That happens when we put our faith in Jesus. So how do we see God? First, we see God with a pure heart. How do we get that pure heart? We get that heart by recognizing I can't do it. Whatever behavioral modification I'm going to rally myself up for this week, that's going to fall short. My heart needs to be purified from Jesus who died in my place. So it's going to be a calling out to Jesus. Jesus, you died for me. I need that cleansing. And it's an effort towards this. We read this in James 4:7. Submit yourselves then to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Come near to God, and he will come near to you. Wash your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. All right, this is the idea that every time we come here, I'm trying to ask God, where do I need to be cleaned? Right, that should be a question for all of us today, right? We come into church, and we get here through all the chaos and trying to get all the socks on the kids and trying to have a smile on our face and try to, whatever the thing is. And we sit here and we hear some songs and hopefully we sing. But ultimately, what we should be doing in the midst of all of it is, God, my heart needs to be purified. And I'm trying to do all the actions, but the actions come from a heart. And my heart, if I want to see you, and I should want to see you, my heart needs to be in the right spot. So God, would you do a work in my heart? Right? And that's an ongoing something. And the lie is, right, the have you heard? The have you heard is you just got to look a certain way. Right? You just got to behave. You just got to behave a certain way. If your actions are a certain way, then God will love you. And God goes, no, I need your heart. I need your desires. I need the things that no one else can see. Then we will see God. Well, what does that look like? We're going to end with this. What does it look like to see God? We see him in two ways. First of all, we can see him partially. Let's pick it up with what God does with Moses. This is chapter 33, verse 20. Moses gets to see him partially. This is after God says, you can't see me and live. God says this. Then the Lord said, there is a place near me where you may stand on a rock. When my glory passes by, I will put you in a cleft in the rock and cover you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will remove my hand, and you will see my back, but my face must not be seen. So God says, hey, I'm going to give you a glimpse of me. You can't handle all of me. You can't see me face to face, but I'm going to give you a glimpse. And then we get this interaction of what happens when this glimpse happens, and Moses gets to see and hear and experience the insane love of God. This is the next chapter, verse 5. It says, "Then the Lord came down in the cloud and stood there with him. And he says, 'Here's who I am.' He proclaims his name, the Lord. And he passed in front of Moses, proclaiming, 'The Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished,'" which is a good thing, right? Don't get hung up on that. That's a beautiful thing, especially if you've been a victim of something. "He punishes the children and their children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation." And listen to Moses' response. Verse 8, "Moses bowed to the ground at once, and he worshiped." Right? When you get a glimpse of who Christ is, when you get a glimpse of who God is, this is our response. "Lord," he said, "if I have found favor in your eyes, then let the Lord go with us. Although this is a stiff-necked people, he recognizes his own brokenness. Forgive our wickedness and our sin, and take us as your inheritance." When we get a partial view of God, that's our response. And the same is true for us today, right? We get a partial view of Jesus. And what do I mean by that? Jesus was alive 2,000 years ago, right? He is in heaven currently, right? We have the Spirit of God living within us, but I'm not sitting here looking at Jesus. Looking at a lot of great things, but not Jesus. So I get a partial view of him. And in that partial view, like Moses got a partial view of God, we get a picture of who God is. Slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love, forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. And my response is what? God, I need to be purified. God, forgive me. And when I have that heart that says, I recognize I need to be pure from the inside, he makes another promise. Someday you will see me face to face. All right, this is the promise from Matthew 5:8, our text for today. The pure in heart, what's going to happen? We will see God. Now, what does that look like? The truth of the matter is, I don't know. I don't know what it will look like to see God face to face. I know a few promises, though. I'm going to read you one right here. 1 John 3:2. "But we know that when Christ appears, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is." Now, there's some grammatical language that's hard to understand. Who is the he in here? Does this mean that when Christ's return, that we will see Christ as he is, or we will see God the Father as he is? I don't exactly know, but I know that we will see God. Right? In my mind, my question is, well, am I going to see God the Father distinct from Christ the Son? And I don't know. I do know that we will see God through the righteousness of Christ, but I don't know exactly what that will mean, and guess what? That's okay. What I know is I will be with God because I have a pure heart, because my heart's been cleansed once and for all by Jesus. As we come to an end here, I want us to think about a few things. We're going to land on these words from David, which Jesus quotes, which is where we get this text from today. But I want us to ask ourselves the question, and we're going to go into a time of journaling. Every week, we're going to try to write. We're going to try to script the flip, right? So, meaning, what have we heard? We have heard our whole lives, our whole global ethos is have your actions be such a way that God will accept you. That's the religion of everyone who's ever lived, except through the grace of Christ, which says, no, your heart is what needs cleansing. And so my question is, where do I need to be honest and say, hey, here's where my heart is wanting, here's where I need to be cleaned. And spend some time getting after that. I'm going to pray this psalm and give us some time to write in our journals, write in the notepad in front of you. Here we go. This is Psalm 24. It says, "Who shall ascend the hill of the Lord? And who shall stand in his holy place?" In other words, who will ever see God? Who will be saved? "He who has clean hands and a pure heart. He who does not lift up his soul to what is false and does not swear deceitfully. He will receive blessing from the Lord and righteousness from the God of his salvation. Such is the generation of those who seek him, who seek the face of the God of Jacob. God, we're going to sit before you here for a minute, and we sit before you as individuals. And some of us need to ask the question, have I been cleansed by you, God? Meaning, have I put my faith that you died in my place, and have I received a new nature from you? All right, that's the crazy gift. We get this nature that's totally new. It's like I take my hunting dog and I give him my neighbor's dog's nature, who's this fluffy golden retriever who licks my cats. God, some of us need that new heart. A lot of us in this room have that new heart, and we need to come before you right now and say, God, where's that heart been wanting? Where's that heart been chasing things that I shouldn't? God, because at the end of the day, I want to see you. God, this is not a place to pretend. This is a place just to be real and honest before you. And thank you for the promise that one day the pure in heart, those who have been purified, who are chasing that we will see you. God, that all the fears that we have, that maybe we're doing it wrong, God, that those will all dissipate when we see you face to face. Looking forward to that day. Would you make it happen soon?